Hello world! If you're tuning in for the first time, I'm thrilled to introduce myself. I'm Ethan Carter. This is my very first appearance on YouTube, and I couldn't be more excited to start this journey with all of you. Together, we're going to explore the intriguing worlds of psychology and philosophy, delve into the human mind, and seek answers to some of life's biggest questions. I'm super excited about today's video, so grab a snack, sit back, and let's jump right into it. Spiritual growth involves acknowledging and grappling with your darker tendencies, not to discard them, but to transform them. People who have done this are not naive, unlike those who haven't integrated their darker side. They are dangerous in a controlled way, like martial artists, and their presence exudes a potential for chaos. This is crucial for self-respect. If you're harmless, you're not virtuous, you're just harmless. Virtue comes from being a monster who doesn't act monstrously. Take Harry Potter, for example. He's flawed, he has evil in him, he breaks rules all the time. But he has a good reason for breaking the rules. If he and his rule-breaking friends didn't break the rules, they wouldn't achieve their ultimate goal. This is a common mythological concept. The hero has to be a monster, but a controlled monster. If you're going to be a fighter, you have to want to win and you have to want to hurt people. Not for the sake of hurting them, but you have to have that capacity. This is a step towards enlightenment, which is not what people usually think. People have been fed a diet of rights and impulsive freedom for so long, there's a hunger for the other side of the story. There are no rights without responsibilities. For the past 60 years, we've only had a dialogue about rights. This leaves a gap in the story, a gap in people's hearts. Responsibility is where most people find the meaning that sustains them through life. It's not in happiness or impulsive pleasure. Those things are fleeting. Adopting the responsibility for your own well-being, trying to keep your family together, serving your community, seeking eternal truth and living them. These are the things that can ground you in your life enough to withstand life's difficulties. When you tell people this, especially when you include yourself in the audience, everyone knows it's true. There's been an attempt to equate masculine competence and power, especially confidence, with tyranny. This is very hard on young men. It's also hard on young women. But it's helpful for people to hear that they should make themselves competent and dangerous and take their proper place in the world. Because the alternative is being weak, and being weak is not good. The people who shoot up high schools are weak. Life is a very difficult process, and you're not prepared for it unless you have the capacity to be dangerous. There's a statement in the New Testament, "The meek shall inherit the earth," but the meek isn't well translated. It means something more like, those who have swords and know how to use them but keep them sheathed will inherit the world. You have to be powerful and formidable, and then peaceful in that order. And that's not the same as being naive and weak and harmless, which is what young men are being encouraged to be. That's a very bad idea because naive, weak, and harmless means that you can't withstand the tragedies of life. You can't bear any responsibility, you'll end up bitter. And when you get bitter, then you get dangerous. You don't treat adult men as if they're infants. But the young men really need to hear this more, I think, is that you should be a monster. You know, because everyone says, well, you should be harmless, virtuous, you shouldn't do anyone any harm, you should sheath your competitive instinct, you shouldn't try to win, you know, you don't want to be too aggressive, you don't want to be too assertive, you want to take a back seat and all of that. It's like, no, wrong. You should be a monster, an absolute monster, and then you should learn how to control it. Someone who is incapable of cruelty is a higher moral being than someone who is capable of cruelty. And I would say, and this follows Jung as well, that that's incorrect, and it's dangerously incorrect. Because if you are not capable of cruelty, you are absolutely a victim to anyone who is. And so part of the reason that people go watch anti-heroes and villains is because there's a part of them crying out for the incorporation of the monster within them, which is what gives them strength of character and self-respect. Because it's impossible to respect yourself until you grow teeth. And if you grow teeth, then you realize that you're somewhat dangerous, or maybe somewhat seriously dangerous. And then you might be more willing to demand that you treat yourself with respect, and other people do the same thing. And so that doesn't mean that being cruel is better than not being cruel. What it means is that being able to be cruel and then not being cruel is better than not being able to be cruel. Because in the first case, you're nothing but weak and naive. And in the second case, you're dangerous, but you have it under control. And a lot of martial arts concentrate on exactly that as part of their philosophy of training. It's like, we're not training you to fight, we're training you to be peaceful and awake and avoid fights. And so that doesn't mean that being cruel is better than not being cruel. What it means is that being able to be cruel and then not being cruel is better than not being able to be cruel. Because in the first case, you're nothing but weak and naive. And in the second case, you're dangerous, but you have it under control. And a lot of martial arts concentrate on exactly that as part of their philosophy of training. It's like, we're not training you to fight, we're training you to be peaceful and awake and avoid fights. But if you happen to have to get in one, and then I guess the philosophy also is that if you're competent at fighting, that actually decreases the probability that you're going to have to fight. Because when someone pushes you, you'll be able to respond with confidence and with any luck, and this is certainly the case with bullies. With any luck, a reasonable show of confidence, which is very much equivalent to a show of dominance, is going to be enough to make the bully back off. And so the strength that you develop in your monstrousness is actually the best guarantee of peace. And that's partly why Jung believed that it was necessary for people to integrate their shadow. And he said that was a terrible thing for people to attempt because the human shadow, which is all those things about yourself that you don't want to realize, reaches all the way to hell. And what he meant by that was, it's through an analysis of your own shadow that you can come to understand why other people, and you as well, are capable of the sort of terrible atrocities that characterized the 20th century. Without that understanding, there's no possibility of bringing it under control. When you study Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union under Stalin, and you're asking yourself, what are these perpetrators like? The answer is, they're just like you. If you don't know that, it means you don't know anything about people, including yourself. And then it also means that you have to discover why they're just like you. And believe me, that's no picnic. So that's enough to traumatize people, and that's partly why they don't do it. And it's also partly why the path to enlightenment and wisdom is seldom trod upon. Because if it was all a matter of following your bliss and doing what made you happy, then everyone in the world would be a paragon of wisdom. But it's not that at all. It's a matter of facing the thing you least want to face. Recognizing yourself as the source of evil, in a sense, actually gives you more respect for yourself, strangely enough, because in the same respect that you might have for a wild animal, or even a monster, so then maybe you learn to treat yourself differently. Like, I think this is particularly true with regards to the discipline of children. If you know that you're a monster, and that will manifest itself in your life, consciously or unconsciously, and if it's unconsciously it's not good, then you become better at disciplining children. And the reason for that is that you don't want to expose them to your dark side. And so, if they behave and don't provoke you, which means they'll also behave for other people, then the monstrous part can stay in abeyance. And then that's great. But if you don't understand yourself as capable of wreaking havoc, and that can be the kind of havoc that unfolds over decades, right? Because if you're going to abuse a child, the primitive form of abuse is the physical abuse. The sophisticated form of abuse is the continual undermining of the child's courage across perhaps their entire life. And there's a terribly monstrous element to that. And if you're not respected properly by the child, say, you will absolutely take revenge on them. And in some sense, that's the whole Freudian psychoanalytic story. It's not all of it, but you either have that or it has you. Those are the options. And you don't become safe by being castrated. When you ask a person who is not very agreeable about their desires or goals, they can articulate them clearly. They know what they want and how they plan to achieve it. However, highly agreeable people who are often so accommodating to others that they neglect their own needs may struggle to identify their own desires. They are so used to fulfilling the needs of others and maintaining harmony that they may lose sight of their own ambitions. This can be detrimental, especially when it comes to career progression. While the average levels of agreeableness between men and women may not differ significantly, the extremes do. The most agreeable individuals tend to be women, while the most disagreeable individuals are often men. This difference becomes crucial when we consider the extremes rather than the average. For instance, there are more men in prison, and the best predictor of imprisonment is low agreeableness. The opposite of compassion and politeness, traits associated with agreeableness, can be seen as a self-centered approach in negotiations. Highly agreeable people tend to negotiate more for the benefit of others than for themselves, while highly disagreeable people prioritize their own interests. Agreeable people need to be cautious not to be exploited, as they are naturally inclined to be accommodating, which can be a disadvantage in certain situations. In psychotherapy, one common reason people seek help is because they are too agreeable. They often need to learn how to negotiate for their own interests. This involves expressing their thoughts honestly, even if they seem harsh or unpleasant. These thoughts are often true and need to be communicated. This can be challenging for agreeable people as they tend to avoid conflict. Agreeable people need to ensure that their children are socially desirable by the age of 4. This means that the child should be able to interact well with other children and adults. If a child is not well behaved, they will face rejection from their peers and insincere reactions from adults. This can have a negative impact on their mental health and well-being. For boys, aggression levels decrease as they are socialized but rise again during puberty due to an increase in testosterone. This is why males are often involved in criminal activities between the ages of 16 and 25. Interestingly, this age range also corresponds with a spike in creativity among men. Agreeable individuals should strive to do something for someone else once a day as a practice, to potentially awaken the dormant circuit within them. This practice can help them develop a broader range of propensities and bring a richer toolkit to each situation. For instance, if you're an extrovert, you should learn to listen more at parties. If you're an introvert, you should learn to speak in public and interact more at social gatherings. If you're agreeable, you need to learn how to assert yourself so that people can't push you around. Conversely, if you're disagreeable, you need to learn how to be more agreeable so that you're not perceived as a selfish, arrogant individual. When choosing a partner, it's important to find someone who isn't too different from you in terms of temperament. It's challenging for an introverted person and an extroverted person to coexist, as is the case for an orderly person and a disorderly person. However, you shouldn't aim to find someone exactly like you, as having an alternative viewpoint can be beneficial. But be cautious, as you may encounter irreconcilable differences. For example, couples who are high and low in openness or conscientiousness often struggle to understand each other's worldview. In conclusion, understanding your temperament and working on your weaknesses can help you improve your life. It's about expanding your capabilities and bringing a richer toolkit to each situation. It's not about changing who you are, but about learning and growing to become a more well-rounded individual. Thank you so much for joining me on this intellectual adventure. If you found this video helpful or thought-provoking, please don't forget to hit the like button and share it with your friends who might also be interested. If you have any thoughts, questions, or ideas for future topics, don't hesitate to drop a comment down below. I'm Ethan Carter, and this is just the beginning of our exploration into psychology and philosophy. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you won't miss any of our future discussions. Remember, the journey of understanding our minds and the world is a continuous process, so keep exploring, stay curious, and until next time, take care and keep thinking.